1 second. Hi. Okay. Real intro. Hold on. Wait. I'm so thrown off. The routine has been changed. And it has thrown me off. Hello. I'm Rachel. Welcome to my book club. Vampires are my special interest book club. Here on Sundays, we read short stories from vampire anthologies that I have collected. We're starting a new book today, but as I said, the routine has been slightly thrown off, and that is discombobulating me. Essentially, my cheap-ass tripod that I use broke. It is now has 2 legs instead of 3. It is no longer a tripod, which is fine. Nobody actually needs to see me. I'm just so used to turning on the camera and having a little like camera me in the corner that it's super weird to not have that. I'm looking at OBS like I'm supposed to be seeing my face moving, and I'm not. It's just a stupid photo of me. It's fine. Like I said, nobody actually needs to see me. It's just weird that I can't see me right now. Feels a little bit like I'm not even streaming at all, honestly. Okay. That said, again, I never really needed a video. I don't know why I was always adding a little camera of me. Nobody cares what I look like. Which is fair enough. I don't even really care what I look like. All right. Anyway, yeah, vampires. New book today. So I wanted to say, well, first of all, it's called Under the Fang. The Horror Writers of America present Under the Fang, edited by Robert R. McCammon. Enter a nightmare realm where vampires rule. Now, this book is from 1991, I believe. So, which doesn't necessarily mean anything. I'm just trying to tell you that it is horror writers. It is horror. All of the previous books we've read, honestly, have been pretty tame in content. None of them have been explicitly horror, though they have dabbled there on occasion. So this is going to be a lot more like explicit. These are your content warnings. Everything that you think can happen in a vampire story is probably going to happen in this book. I've read ahead a little bit just to cut out anything I personally refuse to read onto the internet. Like I'm not going to read any rape scenes, but there is mentions of it. I'm not going to read any animal death or pain because that stresses me out. I don't personally like reading it. I don't want to read it to the internet. Anything like sex scenes, like consensual, if that's too explicit, we're not doing that here. And I will tell you ahead of time the more, I don't know. Just, if this is too much, fair enough. The book we read before this was from like the early 1900s, which was not at all explicit. If that's more your jam, those videos are still up, at least maybe half of them. So go check those out. On Sunday, or this is Sunday, in the midweeks, at least next Wednesday. I haven't been very consistent with it. Nobody can ever say I'm consistent with anything, but I certainly haven't been consistent with it. But I have been doing midweek streams when I can, when I want to, about vampire-related topics. I really wanted to dig into the things that make the vampire genre what it is. Currently, we're deep diving into the beginning of the gothic fiction genre as a whole, and we just finished the Castle of Otranto, and I'm gonna have a little like bullet journal-y session with some Canva and some photos, make mood boards, be a little bit fandom-y about it, right? So that's what we're gonna do next week. So again, if this is too much, there's other content for you to enjoy. I've been doing this for like 2 years now, so there's plenty of videos you can watch that aren't too explicit. But the ones who are cool with it, it's not going, like, if you want the gory details, get a copy. Under the Fang by Robert R. McCammon from 1991. You can find it. Cool. Is there any other intro? Oh, I like to drink water. I'll try not to be gross and swallow into the mic. I also have a fidget toy, but I don't know how much I'm going to play with it. It makes, like, if you can hear that. It makes those kinds of noises. You may notice them in the background, but since I'm going to be holding a book, it's going to be harder for me to fidget with a fidget toy. So I apologize if those noises annoy the shit out of you. They may happen on occasion, but I will do my best to not make them. So just drinking some water right now. Okay, let's switch over. I honestly don't even need this photo up here. You don't need... Where is it? Nope. One of these is the right one. There you go. Okay. Let me read. Wait, I switched to that, but I never even read the back of the... Let me read the back. They've won. They came in the night to the towns and cities. Like a slow, insidious virus, they spread from house to house, building to building, from graveyard to bedroom and cellar to boardroom. They are ancient and deathless, sun-shy and bloodthirsty. For millennia, their vile compulsion kept them in the darkest corners of the human imagination. But the dark-hearted hordes are conquerors now, and those who survive are forced to live under the Fang. In this unparalleled feast for the imagination, America's premier horror writers have created a world of vampirism run amok. From Moscow to Tokyo, New York to Los Angeles, vampire kingdoms rise and fall. Their unholy religions, fiendish science, and depraved entertainments hold ghastly sway. Come share this terrifying vision of a future under the Fang. And it lists the authors: Robert R. McCammon, Nancy A. Collins, Clint Collins, Sidney Williams, and Robert Petit. Al Sorrentonio, Charles D. Lint, Chet Williamson, Susie McKee Charnas, and Chelsea Quinn Yarbro, Richard Lehman, J.N. Williamson, Ed Gorman, Brian Hodge, David N. Meyer, Clifford V. Brooks, Liza W. Cantrell, Dan Perez, and Thomas F. Monteleon. Their time never passes. Their time is now. My copy has obviously been used a bit, and I'm worried that the cover is about to come off at any moment. Oh, and because I got this used, I got it through Thrift Books, I believe, and in it came a bookmark from Borders, which promptly fell to pieces the moment I touched it. The moment I took it out of the book and was like, oh my god, a thing from Borders of all places. It started falling to pieces. Yes, copyright 1991 by the Horror Writers of America, Inc., which will give us new places to look for new stories, hopefully. Hopefully they've printed more vampire short stories in 30 years. Okay, we'll go into the introduction. I only made text pieces for the actual stories. I forgot about the little introduction at the front. I guess it counts. Whatever. Introduction by Robert R. McCammon. My testament. It is written on yellow paper, a scrap I found in an upstairs room. The girl with brown hair spoke a few words this afternoon. She said something about hiding her kitten in a closet. Mr. Bramson heard her. So did Mrs. Carrick. Then the girl with brown hair curled up in a corner and started screaming. It's almost nightfall now, and she keeps screaming. Mr. Bramson found a knife in the kitchen. It's very sharp. The other women say they think they can calm her down, and Reverend O'Neill is holding his crucifix and praying with his eyes squeezed shut. I hope they can make her stop screaming before the light's gone. But if they can't, I'm glad the knife is sharp. I wanted to write down some things. I will fold this paper up and put it into a hole in the wall, and maybe someday it will be read. They've won. They came in the night to the towns and cities. Like a slow, insidious virus, they spread from house to house, building to building, from graveyard to bedroom and cellar to boardroom. They won, while the world struggled with governments and terrorists and the siren song of business. They won, while we weren't looking. And now that we see them, now that we know them, it's much, much too late. The ancient hordes are the conquerors now, and we who survive are living under the fang. From Moscow to Tokyo, New York to Los Angeles, they have come to power. I have a question. What will they do with this world they've won through years of nighttime combats and blood-sucking in the dark? We have a shortwave radio. It's Dr. Kelsing's, actually. He keeps the batteries. His wife never says much. I think she's about to crack, because she cries all the time. Myself, I'm done crying. There's no use in it anymore. Besides, I think they can smell tears. Anyway, we listen to the radio and we find out what's happening in other places. Some humans have joined them, become their pets and slaves. They need humans to watch their hiding places in the daylight. Some humans will do anything for a taste of power, even power reflected from those who cast no reflection. We heard in an interesting broadcast from Switzerland. They've got a center there, up in the Alps. It was a science broadcast, and it talked about the hybrids their doctors have created that merge us and them. In Rome, one of them calls himself the new Caesar. He started the Roman games again, and I have to say, I couldn't listen to most of what was going on. In one of the so-called entertainments, they had humans with no arms fighting other humans with no legs. The winners, I guess, got bitten while the losers just got dead. Is that what the human race has come to? A desperate scrabbling in the dirt like crabs and grasshoppers? Well, they won't take me alive. I swear to God they won't. But we still have hope. It tatters away a little more every day like an old battle flag. But without hope, we'd all need sharp knives. We've heard the stories. A few bands of brothers remain, scattered in the desolate places. They keep fighting and hiding, just like us. Dr. Kelsing told me he heard not all of them are drunk on blood all the time. He said some of them, a few, have pity for humans. Some of them, he believes, might be trying to help the human cause. I don't know about that. Every bloodsucker I ever saw was only interested in getting his or her rush. They do have their politics, though they can't seem to agree on anything except feeding time. Their kingdoms rise and fall. Their cities become fortresses. They declare war on each other, and God help the human herds who get in the way. Let me write this down and make it clear. It's not a good time to have warm blood flowing in your veins. To them, that blood is like heroin and crack, speedballs and nuke and blue crescent all mingled together and calling them. To them, our blood is the damnedest drug you ever could imagine. We're full of what they need to get through the day. Lucky us. Love among the bloodsuckers? Is there such a thing? We were talking about this today. Me, Reverend O'Neill, and Mr. Applebaum. Maybe they know something of love. Reverend O'Neill thinks they might. Hate there certainly is, and plenty of that. They've taken over the television networks, the satellite systems, the radio stations, the newspapers, and the magazines. Everything's geared to the graveyard shift these days. They've created their own fads and sports, their own fashions and mythologies. They make movies and write books in a bizarre mockery, some would say a twisted memory, of what it used to be like to be a human being. Where and when did all this begin? Everybody has a different opinion. I believe it was a government experiment gone wrong. Mr. Bramson believes they've been working up to this fever pitch for 1,000 years. The Careys believe it has something to do with the ozone layer. That new kid, who wears the heavy gauze wrapped around his neck and wrists, believes it's a disease, like a plague. He's the one who brought in the sack full of hand grenades. These bloodsuckers aren't like the ones who used to be in the movies, who used to slink around wearing black capes and turning into bats. No, these suckers are real. They know computers and lasers, space stations and Star Wars. They know advertising and how to sell to the masses. They know Nautilus machines, steroids, and Nikes. They know too damn much, because after all, they used to be us. One thing they don't know is mercy. At least, I've never seen any of it from them. So where do we go from here? Do we die like cattle, hanging from our heels and bleeding into designer bottles? Do we rise up and try to fight, or is fighting a useless dream? Where do we go in a world transformed into a cauldron of black magic, dark hearts, and unholy desires? Is there any true hope for us, crushed under the fang? Or would it be easier, and so coldly sweet, to offer our throats and wrists and let the humanity rush out of us in a red tide so we can learn what it's like to live forever? I don't know. The light is going away now, going away much too quickly. It will be chilly when the sun disappears. The other women are still trying to calm that girl down, but I think she's gone over the edge. I don't think she can come back. I see it in Mr. Bramson's face and in the Reverend's too. Blue light is lying on the blade. If we have to draw straws again, I'll go out of my mind. The ruins in this part of the city are like jagged teeth. We lie under them, waiting. Why doesn't God hold back the night? Why? They'll be prowling soon, prowling in their packs, looking for an easy high. We have the hand grenades. I can smell the fear starting to leak out of everybody's pores. Mine too. The light is going away. Stop that screaming. Stop it. Stop it, stop it, or we'll have to stop it for you. Like we had to stop my husband when he went over the edge. Being human in these days is a terrible responsibility. What shall we do if the screaming won't stop? What shall we do? Night is falling now, falling over the cities and towns, over the fields and forests. Night, that time of dreadful trial. In the dark, someone will have to pick up the knife. And now my testament is done. That's the end of that introduction. So, cool. Let's switch. Okay. Yeah, isn't that a good introduction? I read that and I was like, oh my god, I am so ready to read this book. I love horror. I love horror and creepy vampires. Makes me so freaking happy. Okay. Let me drink some water. Move some of this. I don't need this here. The Miracle Mile by Robert R. McCammon. The car died outside Perdido Beach. Perdido? It was a messy death. The wheeze of oil and the clatter of cylinders. A dark tide spreading across the sun-cracked pavement. When it was over, they sat there for a few minutes saying nothing, just listening to the engine tick and steam. But then the baby began to cry, and it came to them that they had to get moving. Kyle got the suitcase. Allie took the bag of groceries in one arm and the baby in the other. Tommy laced up his sneakers and took the thermos of water. Thermos? Who says thermos? Thermos of water, and they left the old dead car on the roadside and started walking south to the Gulf. Kyle checked his watch again. It was almost 3 o'clock. The sun set late in midsummer. July heat crushed them, made the sweat ooze from their pores and stick the clothes to their flesh. The road, bordered by pine woods, was deserted. This season there would be no tourists. This season there would be no lights or laughter on the Miracle Mile. They kept walking, step after step, into the steamy haze of heat. Kyle took the baby for a while, and they stopped for a sip of water and a rest in the shade. Flies buzzed around their faces, drawn to the moisture. Then Kyle said, "I guess we'd better go on," and his wife and son got up again, the baby cradled in Kyle's arm. Around the next curve of the long road, they saw a car off in the drainage ditch on the left-hand side. The car's red paint had faded, the tires were flat, and the driver's door was open. Of the car's occupants, there was no sign. Allie walked a little closer to Kyle, and they passed the car. Their arms touched, wet flesh against wet flesh, and Kyle noted she looked straight ahead with that 1,000-yard stare he'd seen on his own face as he'd shaved in the mirror this morning at dawn. When are we going to get there? Tommy asked. He was 12 years old, his patience wearing thin. It occurred to Kyle that Tommy asked that question every year from his seat in the back of the car. Hey, Dad, when are we going to get there? Soon, Kyle answered. It's not far. His stock reply. They'd never walked the last few miles into Perdido Beach. Not once in all the many years they'd been coming here for summer vacation. We ought to see the water pretty soon. Hot, Allie said, and she wiped her forehead with the back of her arm. Hot out here. Over 100, Kyle figured. The sun reflecting off the pavement was brutal. The road shimmered ahead, between the thin pines. A black snake slid across in front of them, and up against the blue, cloudless sky, hawks searched for currents. Soon, Kyle said, and he licked his lips. He licked his dry lips. It's not far at all now. This is making me thirsty. Oh God. It was 4 o'clock when the pine woods fell away, and they saw the first wreckage from Hurricane Jolene. A motel with pink walls had some of its roof ripped away. A twisted sign lay in the parking lot in abandoned cars. Curtains, cigarette butts, deck chairs, and other debris floated in the swimming pool. Can we get out of the sun for a few minutes? Allie asked him, and he nodded and led his family toward the pink ruins. Some of the doors remained, but most of them had been torn from their hinges by the storm. The first unit, without a door, had a bed with a blood-stained sheet, and the flies spun above it in a dark, roiling cloud. He opened the door of the next unit, number 8, and they went into a room where the heat had been trapped, but the sun and the flies turned away. The room's bed had been stripped to the mattress, and a lamp with flamingos on the shade had been overturned, but it looked safe. He opened the blinds and the windows, and in his inhalation of air, he thought he could smell the Gulf's salt. Allie sat down on the bed with the baby and took a squeeze tube of sunblock from the grocery bag. She began to paint the infant's face with it as the baby's pink fingers grasped at the air. Then she covered her own face and arms with the sunblock. I'm already burning, she said, as she worked the stuff into her skin. I didn't used to burn so fast. Want some? Yeah, the back of Kyle's neck was stinging. He stood over his wife and looked at the baby as Tommy sprawled on the bed and stared at the ceiling. She needs a name, Kyle said. Hope, Allie answered, and she looked up at her husband with heat-puffed eyes. Hope would be a good name, don't you think? It would be a cruel name, he decided. A name not suited for these times or this world. But saying no would be just as cruel, wouldn't it? He saw how badly Allie wanted it, so he said, I think that's fine. And as soon as he said it, he felt the rage surge in him like a bitter flood tide, and he had to turn away before she saw it in his face. The infant couldn't be more than 6 months old. Why had it fallen to him to do this thing? He took the thermos and went into the bathroom, where there was a sink and a shower stall and a tub with a sliding door of smoked plastic. He pulled the blind up and opened the small window in there too, and then he turned on the sink's tap and waited for the rusty water to clear before he refilled the thermos. Something moved there in the bathroom. Something moved with a long, slow, and agonized stretching sound. Kyle looked at the smoked plastic door for a moment, a pulse beating in his skull, and then he reached out and slid it open. It was lying in the tub like a fat cocoon. It was swaddled in bed sheets and tacky beach towels covered with busty cartoon bathing beauties and studs swigging beer. It was impossible to determine where the head and feet were, the arms bound to its sides and the hands hidden. The thing in its shroud of sheets and towels trembled, a hideous, involuntary reaction of nerves and muscles, and Kyle thought, it smells me. Kill it. He looked back at Allie, who stood in the doorway behind him with the baby in her arms. Her face was emotionless, her eyes vacant as a dreamer's. Kill it, Kyle, she said. Please kill it. Tom, he called. He heard his voice crack. Take your mother outside, will you? The boy didn't respond, and when Kyle peered out from the bathroom, he saw his son sitting up on the bed. Tommy was staring at him with the same dead eyes as his mother. Tommy's mouth was half open, a silver thread of saliva hanging down. Tom, listen up. He said it sharply, and Tommy's gaze cleared. "Go outside with your mother. Do you hear me?" "Yes, sir," Tommy said, and did as he was told. When he was alone, Kyle opened his suitcase, reached beneath the socks and underwear, and found the .38 pistol hidden there. He loaded it from a box of shells, cocked the gun, and walked back into the bathroom where the wrapped-up thing at the bottom of the tub awaited. Kyle tried to get a grip on the towels and pull them loose, but they were held so tightly they wouldn't give. When he pulled with greater determination, the shape began thrashing back and forth with terrible strength, and Kyle let go and stepped back. The thing's thrashing ceased, and it lay still again. Kyle had once seen one that had grown a hard skin, like a roach. He had seen one with a flat, cobra-like head on the elongated neck. Their forms were changing, a riot of evolution gone insane. And these times, in this world, even the fabric of nature had been ripped asunder. He didn't have time to waste. He aimed the gun at the thing's midsection and squeezed the trigger. The noise of the shots were thunderous in the little bathroom. When he was through shooting, there were 6 holes in the towels and sheets, but no blood. "Chew on those," Kyle said. There was a wet, splitting noise. Whitish-black liquid soaked the towels and began to stream toward the drain. Kyle thought of a leech that had just burst open. He clenched his teeth, got out of the bathroom, and closed the door behind him, and then he put the pistol back into the suitcase and snapped the suitcase shut. His wife, son, and the baby called Hope were waiting for him outside in the hot yellow sunshine. Kyle checked the cars in the motel's parking lot. One had keys in the ignition, though its windshield was shattered. He got in and tried the engine. The dead battery wouldn't even give out a gasp. They started walking again, toward the south, as the sun moved into the west and the afternoon shadows began to gather. Pause to drink. Tommy saw them first. Sand dunes rising between the palmettos. He cried out with joy and ran for the beach, where the Gulf's waves rolled up in lathery foam and gulls skimmed the blue water. He took off his sneakers and socks, threw them aside, and rushed into the sea, and behind him came his father and mother, footsore and drenched with sweat. Kyle and Allie both took off their shoes and waded into the water, the baby in Allie's arms, and as the waves rolled around them onto the sand, Kyle inhaled a chestful of salt air and cleansed his senses. Then he looked down the beach, its crescent curving toward the east, and the motels that stood at the edge of the Gulf. They were alone. Gulls darted in, screaming. 2 of them fought over a crab that had been flipped onto its back. Broken shells glittered where the sand turned brown and hard. And all along the beach, the motels, the blocky violet, sea green, periwinkle, and cream-colored buildings that had stood there since Kyle and Allie were teenagers, were without life, like the structures of an ancient civilization. Hurricane Jolene had done its damage. Some of the motels, the spindrift, the sea anchor, the coral reef, had been reduced to hulks, their signs battered and dangling, their windows broken out, whole walls washed away. 100 yards down the beach, a cabin cruiser lay on its side, its hull ripped open like a fish's belly. Where Kyle recalled the sight of 100 sunbathers tanning on their towels, there was nothing but white emptiness. The lifeguard station was gone. There was no aroma of coconut-scented tanning butter, no blare of radios, no volleyball games, nobody tossing a frisbee to a dog in the surf. The gulls strutted around, fat and happy in the absence of humanity. Kyle had expected this, but the reality gnawed at his heart. He loved this place. He had been young here, had met and courted Allie here. They'd come to Perdido Beach on their honeymoon 16 years ago, and they'd come back every year since. What was summer without a vacation at the beach, without sand in your toes, the sun on your shoulders, the sound of young laughter, and the smell of the Gulf? What was life worth without such as that? A hand slid into his. "We're here," Allie said. She was smiling, but when she kissed him, he tasted a tear. They were going to cook out in the sun. They needed to find a room, check in, stow the suitcase and the groceries. Think about the future. Kyle watched the waves coming in. Tommy went underwater, clothes and all, and rose up sputtering and yelling for the sake of it. Allie's hand squeezed Kyle's, and Kyle thought, we're standing on the edge of what used to be, and there's nowhere left to run. Nowhere. I love you, Kyle told his wife, and he drew her tightly against him. He could feel the heat of her skin. She was going to have a bad sunburn. Hope's cheeks were red. Pick up some solar cane somewhere. God knows they don't need it. Nowhere. He walked out of the water. The wet sand sucked around his ankles, trying to hold him, but he broke free and trudged up across the hard sand, leaving footprints all the way to where he'd left his suitcase. Allie was following him with the red-cheeked Hope. Tom? Kyle called. Tommy, let's go. The boy splashed and romped for a moment more, gulls spinning around his head, either in curiosity or thinking he was a rather large fish. And then Tommy came out of the water and picked up his socks and sneakers. They began to walk eastward on the beach, towards the Miracle Mile. A skeleton lay half buried in the sand just past the wrecked cabin cruiser. A child's orange pail was caught by the surf, pulled out and thrust onto shore again, the sea playing a game with the dead. The sun was getting lower, the shadows growing. The suitcase was heavy, so Kyle changed hands. The tires of a dune buggy jutted up from the waves, and farther on a body with some flesh on it was drifting in the shallow water. The shadow water. The gulls had been at work. It was not pretty. Pause to drink some water. Just my random comment. It is February and it's snowing a little bit outside. Like, I wish I was getting sunburned at the beach right now. I wish I was getting sunburned at the beach. I love snow. I want to be sunburned at the beach. Anyway, just trade places with the characters in this story. It would be a grand time. Cal watched his wife, her shadow growing before her. The baby began to cry, and Allie gently shushed her. Tommy threw shells into the water, trying to get a skimmer. They had found the infant in a gas station south of Montgomery, Alabama, near 9 o'clock this morning. There had been an abandoned station wagon outside at the pumps, and the child had been on the floor in the woman's room. On the driver's seat of the station wagon was a great deal of dried blood. Tommy had thought the blotch looked like the state of Texas. There had been dried blood on the doorknob of the woman's room, too, but what had happened at that gas station was unknown. Was the mother attacked? Had she planned to come back for the baby? Had she crawled off into the woods and died? They'd searched around the gas station but found no corpses. Why was that paragraph so hard for me to pronounce? Blah, blah. Okay. Well, life was a mystery, wasn't it? Okay. Kyle had agreed to take the baby with them on their vacation to the beach, but he cursed God for doing this to him because he'd finally got things right in his soul. Hope. It had to be a cosmic joke. And if God and the devil were at war over the spinning ball of black sorrows, it was terribly clear who had control of the nuclear weapons. Biological incident. This was the first of it. How the government tried to explain. A biological incident at some kind of secret, up until then, testing center in North Dakota. That was 6 years ago. The biological incident was worse than they'd let on. They had created something from their stew of gene manipulation and bacteriological tampering that had sent their 10 test subjects out into the world with a vengeance. The 10 had multiplied into 20, the 20 to 40, the 40 to 80, and on and on. They had the wrath of hell in their blood, a contamination that made AIDS look like a common cold. The germ boys had learned how to create, by accident, yes, weapons that walked on two legs. What foreign power were we going to unleash that taint upon? No matter. It had come home to live. Biological incident. Kyle shifted the suitcase again. Call them what they are, he thought. They craved blood like addicts used to crave heroin and crack. They wrapped themselves up and hid in closets and basements and any hole they could winnow into. Their skin burst and oozed, and they split apart at the seams like old suits in the sunlight. Call them what they are, damn it. They were everywhere now. They had everything. The television networks, the corporations, the advertising agencies, the publishing houses, the banks, the law, everything. Once in a while, a pirate station broke in on the cable, human beings pleading for others not to give up hope. Hope. There it was again, the cosmic joke. Those bastards were as bad as fundamentalist preachers. Their role models were Jim Baker and Jerry Falwell, seen through a dark glass. They wanted to convert everybody on Earth, make them see the truth. And if you didn't choose to join the fold, they battered you in like a weak door and chewed the faith into you. It wasn't just America. It was everywhere. Canada, the Soviet Union, Japan, Germany, Norway, Africa, England, South America, and Spain. Everywhere. The contamination, the faith, knew no racial nor national boundaries. It was another cosmic joke, with a hideous twist. The world was moving toward a true brotherhood. Kyle watched his shadow loom before him, its darkness merging with Allie's. If a man couldn't take a vacation in the sun with his family, he thought, then what the hell good was living? Hey, Dad, Tommy said. There it is. Kyle looked to where his son was pointing. The motel had stucco walls painted pale blue, its roof of red slate. Some of the roof had collapsed, the walls and windows broken. The motel sign had survived the hurricane and said, the driftwood. It was where Kyle and Allie had spent their honeymoon and where they'd stayed, cabana number 5, overlooking the Gulf, every summer vacation for 16 years. Yes, Kyle answered. That's the place. He turned his back to the sea and walked toward the concrete steps that led up to the driftwood, and Allie followed with Hope and the grocery bag. Tommy paused to bend down and examine a jellyfish that had washed up and been caught by the sun at low tide, and then he came on to. The row of ocean view cabanas had been demolished. Number 5 was a caravan of debris, its roof caved in. Watch the glass, Kyle cautioned them, and he continued on around the brackish swimming pool and the deck that caught the afternoon sea breeze. He climbed another set of stairs from the pool's deck to the major portion of the driftwood, his wife and son behind him, and he stood facing a warren of collapsed rooms and wreckage. Summer could be a heartless thing. For a few seconds he almost lost it. Tears burned his eyes, and he thought he was going to choke on a sob. It had been important, so vitally important, that they come to Perdido Beach again and see this place where life had been fresh and good and all the days were ahead of them. Now, more than anything, Kyle could see that it was over. But then Allie said, in a terribly cheerful voice, "It's not so bad," and Kyle laughed instead of cried. His laughter spiraled up, was taken by the Gulf breeze and broken like the walls of the driftwood. "We can stay right here," Allie said, and she walked past her husband into an opening where a door used to be. The room's walls were cracked, the ceiling blotched with water stains. The furniture, bed, chest of drawers, chairs, lamps, all ticky-tacky when they were new, had been whirled around and smashed to kindling. Pipes stuck up where the sink had been in the bathroom, but the toilet remained, and the shower stall, empty of intruders, was all right. Kyle tried the tap and was amazed to hear a rumbling down in the driftwood's guts. A thin trickle of rusty water flowed from the shower head. Kyle turned the tap off, and the rumbling died. "Clear this stuff away," Allie told Tommy. "Let's get this mattress out from underneath." "We can't stay here," Kyle said. "Why can't we?" Her eyes were vacant again. "We can make do. We've been making do at home. We can make do on vacation, too." "No, we've got to find somewhere else." "We've always stayed at the driftwood." A childlike petulance rose up in her voice, and she began to rock the baby. "Always. We can stay right here like we do every summer. Can't we, Tommy?" I guess so, he said, and he nudged the shattered television set with his foot. Kyle and Allie stared at each other. The breeze came in around them through the doorway and then left again. We can stay here, Allie said. She's out of it, he thought. Who could blame her? Her systems were shutting down, a little tighter day by day. All right. He touched her hair and smoothed it away from her face. The driftwood it is. Pause to drink. Tommy went to find a shovel and broom because there was a lot of glass on the linoleum-tiled floor. As Allie unpacked the groceries, the baby laid to rest on a pillow. Kyle checked the rooms on either side. Nothing sleeping in them, nothing folded up and waiting. He checked as many rooms as he could get into. There was something bad, neither skeleton nor fully fleshed, but bloated and dark as a slug, wearing a flower print shirt and red shorts in a room nearer the pool, but Kyle could tell it was a dead human being and not one of them. A Gideon's Bible lay close at hand, and also the broken beer bottle with which the sun lover had slashed his wrists. On a countertop, next to the stub of a burned-out candle, was a wallet, some change, and a set of car keys. Kyle didn't look at the wallet, but he took the keys. Then he put the shower curtain over the corpse and continued his search of the Driftwood's rooms. He walked through a breezeway, past the Driftwood's office, and to the front of the motel, and there he found a half-dozen cars in the parking lot. Across the street was Nick's Pancake House, its windows blown in. Next to it, the goofy golf place and the go-kart track, both deserted, their concession stands shuttered and storm-ravaged. Kyle began to check the cars, as gulls cried out overhead and sailed in lazy circles. The keys fit the ignition of a blue Toyota with a Tennessee license tag. Its engine, cranky at first, finally spat black smoke and awakened. The gas gauge's needle was almost to E, but there was plenty of gas stations on the strip. Kyle shut the engine off and got out, and that was when he looked towards the Miracle Mile. It was a beautifully clear afternoon. He could see all the way to the amusement park, where the Ferris wheel and the roller coaster rose up, where the Sky Needle loomed over the Hangout Dance Pavilion, and the super water slide stood next to the beach arcade. His eyes stung. He heard ghosts in the wind, calling in young voices from the dead world. He had to look away from the Miracle Mile before his heart cracked, and he walked back the way he'd come, the keys gripped in his palm. Tommy was at work clearing away debris. The mattress had been swept free of glass, and a chair had been salvaged, and a table on which a lamp had set. Allie had put on her swimsuit, the one with aquamarine fish on it that she'd found in a Sears store last week, and she wore sandals so her feet wouldn't be cut. The flesh of her arms and face were blushed with Florida sun. It dawned on Kyle how much weight Allie had lost. She was skinny as she'd been their first night together, here at the Driftwood, a long, long time ago. "I'm ready for the beach," she told him. "How do I look?" She turned around for him to appreciate the swimsuit. "Nice, really nice." "We shouldn't waste the sunshine, should we?" She'd had enough sun for one day, but he smiled tightly and said, "No." Beneath one of the yellow beach umbrellas, Kyle sat beside his wife while she fed Hope from a jar of Gerber's mixed fruit. The groceries had come from a supermarket in the same area they'd found the baby, and Allie had stocked up on items she hadn't even thought about since Tommy was an infant. Out in the Gulf, Tommy splashed and swam as the sun sparkled golden on the waves. "Don't go too far," Kyle cautioned, and Tommy waved his "don't worry" wave and swam out a little farther. There was a boy for you, Kyle thought, always testing his limits, like me when I was his age. Kyle lay down on the sand, his hands cupped behind his head. He had been coming to Perdido Beach since he was 5 years old. One of his first memories was of his father and mother dancing at the pavilion to Stardust or some other old tune. He recalled a day when his father had taken him on every ride on the Miracle Mile, the Ferris wheel, roller coaster, Mad Mouse, Tilt-A-Whirl, Scrambler, and Octopus. He remembered his father's square brown face and white teeth, clenched in a grin as the mad mouse shot them heavenward. They had feasted on popcorn, cotton candy, candied apples, and corn dogs. They had thrown balls at milk jugs and rings at spindles and come away empty-handed but wiser in the ways of the Miracle Mile. It had been one of the happiest days of his life. After Kyle's mother had died of cancer 8 years ago, his father had moved out to Arizona to live near his younger brother and his wife. A little over a week passed. A midnight call had come from that town in Arizona, and through the static hissing phone line, the voice of Kyle's father had said, "I'm coming to visit you, son. Coming real soon. Me and your Uncle Alan and Aunt Patty Ann. I feel so much better now, son. My joints don't ache anymore. Oh, it's a wonderful life, this is. I sure do look forward to seeing my sweet grand boy." They had left their house the next morning and found another house in a town 10 miles away. There were still some humans left in the little towns, but some of them were crazy with terror, and others had made fortresses out of their homes. They put bars on the windows and slept in the daylight, surrounded by guns and barbed wire. Kyle sat up and watched his son throwing himself against the waves, the glittering water splashing high. He saw himself out there. He hadn't changed so much, but the world had. The ratchet gears of God's machine had slipped. From here on out, the territory was treacherous and uncharted. He had decided he couldn't live behind bars and barbed wire. He couldn't live without the sun or Perdido Beach in July or without Tommy and Allie. If those things got hold of him, if they got hold of any of his family, then what would life be? A scuttling in the dark? A moan from gore-wet lips? He couldn't think about this anymore, and he blanked his mind. A trick he'd learned out of necessity. Pause to drink. He watched his wife feeding the baby. The sight of Allie cradling the child made him needful. The need was on him before he could think about it. Allie was skinny, sure, but she looked good in her new swimsuit, and her hair was light brown and pretty in the reflected sunlight, and her gray eyes had the shine of life in them again. For a little while. He said, "Allie?" And when she looked at him, she saw the need in his face. He touched her shoulder, and she leaned over and kissed him on the lips. The kiss lingered, grew soft and wet, and his tongue found hers. Gross. I swear it doesn't get explicit. I just didn't like saying that sentence. She smiled at him, her eyes hazy, and she put the child down on a beach towel. He didn't care if Tommy saw. Gross. They were beyond the need for privacy. Gross. A precious moment could not be turned aside. Kyle and Allie lay together under the yellow umbrella, their bodies damp and entwined, their hearts beating hard, and out in the waves Tommy pretended not to see and went diving for sand dollars. He found 10. The sun was sinking. It made the Gulf of Mexico turn the color of fire, and way out past the shallows dolphins played. "It'll be getting dark soon," Kyle said at last. The moon was coming out, a slice of silver against the east's darkening blue. "I've got somebody's car keys. Want to ride up to the Miracle Mile?" Allie said that would be fine, and she held hope against her breasts. The wind had picked up. It blew stinging sand against their legs as they walked across the beach. Tommy stopped to throw a shell. "I've got a skimmer, Dad," he shouted. In the room, Allie put on a pair of white shorts over her wetsuit. Tommy wore a t-shirt with the computer image of a rock band on the front and baggy orange cutoffs. Kyle dry-shaved with his razor, then dressed in a pair of khaki trousers and a dark blue pullover shirt. As he was lacing up his sneakers, he gave Tommy the car keys. "It's a blue Toyota, Tennessee tag. Why don't you go start her up?" "You mean it? Really? Why not?" "All right." Wait a minute, Kyle cautioned before Tommy could leave. "Allie, why don't you go with him? I'll be up in a few minutes." She frowned, reading his mood. "What's wrong?" "Nothing. I just want to sit here and think. I'll be there by the time you get the car ready." Allie took the baby, and she and Tommy went around to the parking lot. In the gathering dark, Kyle sat on the mattress and stared at the cracks in the wall. This was their honeymoon motel. It had once seemed like the grandest place on earth. Maybe it still was. When Kyle opened the Toyota's door and Tommy slid into the back seat, he was wearing his poplin windbreaker, zipped up to his chest. He got behind the wheel and he said, "Let's go see it." Theirs was the only car that moved on the long, straight road called the Strip. Kyle turned on the headlights, but it wasn't too dark to see the destruction on either side of them. "We ate there last summer," Tommy said, and pointed at a heap of rubble that used to be a Pizza Hut. They drove past T-Shirt City, the Shell Shack, and the Dixie Hot Shop, where a cook named Pee-wee used to make the best grouper sandwiches Kyle had ever eaten. All those places were dark hulks now. He kept going at a slow, steady speed, cruising the Strip, he and his buddies used to call it, when they came looking for girls and good times on spring break. His first roaring drunk was in a motel called the Surf's Inn. His first poker game had been played at Perdido Beach. He'd lost his first real fight behind a bar here and ended up with a busted nose. He'd met the first girl well, there had been a lot of firsts at Perdido Beach. God, there were ghosts here. "Sun's almost gone," Tommy said. Kyle turned the car to a place where they could watch the sunset over a motel's ruins. It was going down fast. The Gulf streaked with The Gulf streaked with dark gold, orange, and purple. Allie's hand found her husband's. It was the hand with her wedding ring on it. The baby cried a little, and Kyle knew how she felt. The sun went away in a last scarlet flash, and then it was gone toward the other side of the world, and the night was closing in. "It was pretty, wasn't it?" Allie said. "Sunsets are always so pretty at the beach." Kyle started driving again, taking them to the Miracle Mile. His heart was beating hard, his palms damp on the wheel, because there it was, the paradise of his memories. He pulled the car to the side of the road and stopped. The last of the light glinted on the rails of the roller coaster. The Ferris wheel's cars were losing their paint and rocked in the strengthening wind. Another casualty of Jolene was the Mad Mouse's maze of tracks, the long red roof of the Hangout Dance Pavilion, the underside of which was painted with day-glow stars and comets, had been stripped to the boards. But the open-air building still stood. Within the smashed windows of the beach arcade, the pinball machines had been overturned. Metal rods dangled down from the sky needle, its foundation cracked. The concession stand that used to sell foot-long hot dogs and flavored snow cones had been flattened. The water slide had survived, though, and so had a few of the other mechanical rides. The merry-go-round, a beauty of carved, leaping lions and proud horses, remained almost unscathed. Fit for the junkyard were the haunted house and hall of mirrors, but the fun house with its entrance through a huge red grin was still there. "We met here," Allie said. She was talking to Tommy. "Right over there." She pointed toward the roller coaster. "Your father was in line behind me. I was with Carol Atkins and Denise McCarthy. When it came time for us to get on, I had to sit with him. I didn't know him. I was 16 and he was 18. He was staying at the Surf's Inn. That's where all the hoods stayed." "I wasn't a hood," Kyle said. "You were what a hood was then. You drank and smoked, and you were looking for trouble." She stared at the roller coaster, and Kyle watched her face. "We went around 4 times. 5. 5, she recalled and nodded. "The 5th time we rode in the front car. I was so scared I almost wet my pants." "Oh, Mom," Tommy said. "He wrote me a letter. It came a week after I got home. There was sand in the envelope." She smiled, a faint smile, and Kyle had to look somewhere else. "He said he hoped we could see each other again. Do you remember that, Kyle?" "Like yesterday," he answered. "I dreamed about the Miracle Mile for a long time after that. I dreamed we would be together. I was a silly thing when I was 16. "You're still that way," Tommy said. "Amen," Kyle said. They sat there for a few more minutes, staring down the darkening length of the Miracle Mile. Many lives had crossed here. Many had come and gone, but this place belonged to them. They knew it in their hearts. It was theirs forever. Their linked initials cut into a wooden railing of the hangout and said so. It didn't matter that there might be 10,000 more initials carved in the pavilion. They had returned here, and where were the others? The wind made the Ferris wheel's cars creak, but otherwise silence reigned. Cal broke it. "We ought to go to the pier. That's what we ought to do." The long fishing pier just past the Miracle Mile, where the bait used to be cut and reeled out every hour of the day and night. He and his father used to go fishing there, while his mother stretched out on a folding chair and read the forms from the dog track up the highway. I'm going to need some solar cane, Allie said as they drove past the Miracle Mile. My arms are stinging. And I'm thirsty, Tommy said. Can we get something to drink? Sure. We'll find something. The pier, longest pier on the Panhandle, the battered metal sign said, was a half-mile past the amusement park. Kyle parked in front of it in a deserted lot. A soft drink machine stood inside the pier's admission gate, but without electricity, it was useless. Tommy got his arm up inside it and grasped a can, but he couldn't pull it out. Kyle turned the machine over and tried to break it open. Its lock held, a last grip on civilization. Damn, Tommy said, and kicked the machine. Next door to the pier, across the lot, was the rubble of what had been a seafood restaurant. The sign remained, a swordfish riding a surfboard. Why don't we try over there? Kyle asked, placing his hand on his son's shoulder. Maybe we can find some cans. Allie, we'll be right back. I'll go with you. No, he said. You wait on the pier. Allie stood very still. In the deepening gloom, Kyle could only see the outline of her face. I want to talk to Tommy, Kyle told her. She didn't move. It seemed to him she was holding her breath. Man talk, he said. Silence. Finally, she spoke. Come right back, okay? Okay. And don't step on a nail. Be careful, okay? We will be. Watch where you walk, too. He guided Tommy toward the ruins, and the wind shrilled around them. They were almost there when Tommy asked what he wanted to talk about. Just some stuff, Kyle answered. He glanced back. Allie was on the pier, facing away from them. Maybe she was looking at the sea, or maybe at the Miracle Mile. It was hard to tell. I got too much sun. My neck's burning. Oh, Kyle said. You'll be all right. The stars were coming out. It was going to be a beautiful night. He kept his hand on Tommy's shoulder, and together they walked into the wreckage beneath the surfing swordfish. They kept going, over glass and planks, until Kyle had the remnant of a cinder block wall between them and Allie. Dad, how are we going to find anything in here? It's so dark. Hold it. See that? There beside your right foot? Is that a can? I can't see it. Kyle unzipped his windbreaker. I think it is. A lump had lodged in his throat and he could barely speak. Can you see it? Where? Kyle placed one hand against the top of his son's head. It was perhaps the most difficult movement of flesh and bone he had ever made in his life. Right there, he said, as he drew the .38 from his waistband with his other hand. Click. What was that, Dad? You're my good boy, Kyle croaked, and he put the barrel against Tommy's skull. No, this was the most difficult movement of flesh and bone. A spasm of his finger on the trigger, a terrible crack that left his eardrums ringing. It was done. Tommy slid down, and Kyle wiped his hand on the leg of his trousers. Oh, Jesus, he thought. A sense of panic welled inside him. Oh, Jesus. I should have found him something to drink before I did it. He staggered, tripped over a pile of boards and cinder blocks, and went down on his knees in the dark, and the after-sound of the shot still echoing. My God, he died thirsty. Oh my God, I just killed my son. He shivered and moaned, sickness burning in his stomach. It came to him that he might have only wounded the boy, and Tommy might be lying there in agony. Tommy, he said, can you hear me? No. He'd shot the boy right in the back of the head, just as he'd planned. If Tommy wasn't dead, he was dying, and he knew nothing. It had been fast and unexpected, and Tommy hadn't had a chance to even think about death. Forgive me, Kyle whispered, tears streaking down his face. Please forgive me. It took him a while to find the strength to stand. He put the pistol away and zipped his windbreaker up again, and then he wiped his face and left the ruins where his son's body lay. Kyle walked toward the pier, where Allie stood with the baby in the deep purple dark. Kyle, she called before he reached her. Yes. I heard a noise. Some glass broke. It's all right. Where's Tommy, Kyle? He'll be here in a few minutes, Kyle said, and he stopped in front of her. He could feel the sea moving below him amidst the pier's concrete pilings. Why don't we walk to the end? Allie didn't speak. Hope was sleeping, her head against Allie's shoulder. Kyle looked up at the sky full of stars and the silver slice of moon. We used to come out here together, remember? She didn't answer. We used to come out and watch the fishermen at night. I asked you to marry me at the end of the pier. Do you remember? Yes, a quiet voice. Then when you said yes, I jumped off. Remember that? I thought you were crazy, Allie said. I was. I am. Always will be. He saw her tremble violently. Tommy? She called into the night. Tommy, come on now. Walk with me, all right? I can't think, Kyle. I can't. Kyle took her hand. Her fingers were cold. There's nothing to think about. Everything's under control. Do you understand? We can stay right here, she said. Right here. It's safe here. There's only one place that's safe, Kyle said. It's not here. Tommy? She called, and her voice broke. Walk with me, please. He gripped her hand tighter. She went with him. Jolene had bitten off the last 40 feet of the pier and ended on a jagged edge, and below them the gulf surged against the pilings. Kyle put his arm around his wife and kissed her cheek. Her skin was hot and damp. She leaned her head against his shoulder as Hope's head was against her own. Kyle unzipped the windbreaker. It was a good day, wasn't it? He asked her, and she nodded. The wind was in their faces, coming in hard off the sea. I love you, Kyle said. I love you, she answered. Are you cold? Yes. He gave her his windbreaker and zipped it up around her shoulders and the baby. Look at those stars, he said. You can't see so many stars anywhere else but the beach, can you? She shook her head. Kyle kissed her temple and put a bullet into it. Then he let her go. Allie and the baby fell off the pier. Kyle watched her body go down and splash into the Gulf. The waves picked her up, closed over her, turned her on her stomach, and made her hair float like an opening fan. Kyle looked up at the sky. He took a deep breath, cocked the pistol again, and put the barrel into his mouth, pointed upward toward his brain. God forgive me, there is no hell, there is no... He heard a low, humming sound. The noise, he realized, of machinery at work. Lights came on, a bright shock in the sky. The stars faded. Multicolored reflections scrawled across the moving waves. Music, the sound of a distant pipe organ. Kyle turned around, his bones freezing. The Miracle Mile. The Miracle Mile was coming to life. Lights rimmed the Ferris wheel and the roller coaster's rails. Floods glared over the super water slide. The merry-go-round was lit up like a birthday cake. A spotlight had been pointed upward and combed the night above the Miracle Mile like a call to celebration. Kyle's finger was on the trigger. He was ready. He could see figures in the gondolas. The center track of the roller coaster started moving with a clanking of gears, and then the roller coaster cars were cranked up to the top of the first incline. There were people in the cars. No, not people. Not human beings. Them. They had taken over the Miracle Mile. Kyle heard Kyle heard them scream with delight as the roller coaster's cars went over the incline like a long, writhing snake. The merry-go-round was turning. The pipe organ music, a scratchy recording, was being played from speakers at the carousel center. Kyle watched the riders going around, and he pulled the pistol's barrel from his mouth. Light bulbs had blinked on in the hangout, and now the sound of rock music spilled out from a jukebox. Kyle could see them in the pavilion, a mass of them pressing together and dancing at the edge of the sea. They had taken everything. The night, the cities, the towns, freedom, the law, the world, and now the Miracle Mile. Kyle grinned savagely as tears ran down his cheeks. The roller coaster rocketed around. The Ferris wheel was returning faster. They had hooked up generators, of course, there in the amusement park. They'd gotten gasoline to run the generators from a gas station on the strip. You can make bombs out of gasoline in bottles. Find those generators. Pull the plug on the Miracle Mile. He had 4 bullets in the gun. The extras had been in case he screwed up and wounded instead of killed. 4 bullets. The car keys had been in the windbreaker. Sleep well, my darling, he thought. I'll be joining you. But not yet. Not yet. Maybe he could find a way to make the roller coaster's cars jump the tracks. Maybe he could blow up the hangout, with all of them mashed up together inside. They would make a lovely bonfire on this starry summer night. He gritted his teeth, his guts full of rage. They might take the world, but they would not take his family. and they would pay for taking the miracle mile if he could do anything about it. He was insane now. He knew it, but the instant of knowing was pulled away from him like Allie's body in the waves, and he gripped the pistol hard and took the first step back along the pier towards shore. Careful. Keep to the darkness. Don't let them see you. Don't let them smell you. Screams and laughter soared over the miracle mile as a solitary figure walked back with a gun in his hand and flames in his mind. It came to Kyle that his vacation was over. End of story. I like that one. I think it's a great opening. I'm kind of disappointed he didn't just kill himself. I thought that would have been poignant, but it's going evil. Sure, whatever. I've only read ahead a couple pages, a couple stories, you know, to make sure I didn't read anything terrible on accident on stream. And so far it seems like it's going to be a lot of dudes being dudes, you know? It's not him and his wife holding hands and killing their kid together because they don't want to raise a kid in this horrible world. It's the man taking charge and killing everybody because he sees no hope in them, even if they see enough hope to name a child hope. He knows better because he's the dad. You know, that kind of vibe is just throughout the first couple, like first 5 or 6. Some that kind of vibe is really frustrating, but it is from the 90s, the very early 90s. So this is what we get. But I do like it. It's haunting and scary and creepy, and I did not expect him to just kill his family like that. I did not see that coming. I should have. It seems obvious looking back, but like I did not see that. Anyway, I hope you guys liked it, and we'll move on to the next story. It's weird after so many books where it starts with a blurb from the author. It's weird to not have any of that right now. I'm expecting a whole biography about the authors before I even start the story, but nope. I should have got more water. Okay. I still have some coffee. It's fine. Okay. Next story. Oh, I should change that. But there we go. Dancing Nightly by Nancy A. Collins. It does have animal death in it. This one's much more gory and gross, which if you know anything about Nancy A. Collins is kind of expected. I did a video about her Sonia Blue series, or at least the first book. It's the second video on my channel, so if you want to get more into her content, there's something there already. And we did a story previously from women, was this like the Mammoth Book of Women writing vampire stories or something. Women vampires written by women humans. There's like the something goth chicks. Very, very good, very descriptive. It's in there somewhere. I'm sorry. I should just shut up and read the story. Okay. Dancing Nightly by Nancy A. Collins. It was midnight by the time Mavrides got out of his coffin. Usually he woke around dusk, just as the sun started its descent behind the towering steel and the black glass boxes that dominated the skyline. But last night had been a long one. His joints popped like rifle shots as he climbed from the confines of the narrow, satin-lined mahogany box. His temples throbbed sluggishly as his pulse restarted. He hadn't been this hungover in... He shrugged and let the analogy drop. He'd been undead since the late 60s, long before the uprising, and the human ability to measure time in such trivial increments as weeks and months had long since atrophied. He staggered into the bathroom and rinsed out his mouth, watching the clotted blood swirl down the drain. He took his shaving kit out of the medicine cabinet, no longer noticing the carefully opaqued mirror face. He'd gotten used to shaving blind over the years, although the first time he tried it, he opened his throat from ear to ear. Not that it mattered. How the heck do you... What? How do you... Ear to ear when you're shaving? How are you shaving? No, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Not that it mattered. Still, it was embarrassing to be seen in public with such scars. Mav Reed's was nothing if not image conscience. After all those years posing as human, the habit was difficult to break. Mav Reed's padded along the unlit hall to the kitchen. He did not need artificial light to guide him. His apartment building was vampires only. The few remaining human tenants had been forcibly relocated to the pens on the outskirts of town, or simply converted. The landlords had thoughtfully installed floor-to-ceiling blackout curtains for the few windows that weren't bricked over. They also brought in an electrician to remove all the overhead light fixtures. These perks had been instrumental in Mav Reed's decision to buy into the condo. And then there's like 4 paragraphs where he lives on kitten blood. He has kittens and he eats them. And that's all I'm going to say, because that really stressed me out to read the first time. I don't like animal pain and death and stuff. Blah. Use your imagination or get a copy of the book yourself. Okay. Refreshed by his pick-me-up, he chose his evening attire. He was supposed to meet Smith and Wellman down at the club, and he was already late. He quickly pulled on his black silk shirt, black designer jeans, black motorcycle boots, black suede gloves, black raincoat, and black velvet beret. He didn't need a mirror to tell him he looked cool. Club Vlad was the hottest bar in town. There were plenty of vampire-only places since the uprising, but Club Vlad claimed the distinction of being the first and the best. It was located in the old warehouse district, near the docks, and before the world's vampires came out of their coffins and into the streets. It had catered to humans with special interests. When the owner voluntarily converted, it was only natural that the club do so as well. The building was a huge wooden structure, the roof adorned with a neon sculpture of Bela Lugosi glowering from behind his upraised cape. Beneath the dead actor's likeness was a blood-red sign that proclaimed in glowing cursive, "Dancing Nightly." All of the windows were boarded up, and the front entrance was guarded by a muscular vampire with biker tattoos swarming over his bare chest and forearms. The bouncer grunted and opened the soundproofed door as Mav Reed's approached. Stale air and the repetitive throb of electronic music washed onto the deserted street. Someone inside screamed. Mav Reed's hurried inside. Shit. He was missing the floor show. Once he crossed the threshold, he saw he needn't have worried. A nouveau undead had a waitress pinned to a table and was busy trying to tear out her throat. The human, naked except for the leather collar that protected her neck and secured her to the length of chain that led to the bar, kicked and clawed at her assailant. As Mav Reeds watched, the tattooed bouncer grabbed the drunken vampire and propelled him toward the door. "That's it, dead boy. I thought I told you to leave." The drunk, his face smeared with saliva and blood, tried to break away. The bouncer casually yanked the rowdy's left arm off. "Ow! That hurts!" "Too freaking bad. Now get out and stay out." The bouncer hurled the drunk out the door. "And take this with you," he added, throwing the still twitching arm after him. Mav Reed shook his head in disgust. The nouveau undead were only a step or two from being human. Few of them could handle their blood without getting sloppy. Most of them had a hard time metabolizing the straight stuff, let alone tainted juice. It wasn't like the bad old days when you had to be discreet in order to simply survive. The new breed of vampire didn't have to worry about waking up with a stake piercing their thorax. One of the club's vampiric employees leaned over the savaged waitress, casually licking his fingers as he checked her wounds. Mav Reeds wondered what the world was coming to. He shouldered his way to the bar, eyeing the pale-skinned, hollow-cheeked humans tethered to the brass foot rail by spools of stainless steel chain. While alcohol and other narcotics had no direct effect on vampires, the tainted blood of addicts was a powerful intoxicant. While most undead clubs offered only a handful of junkies and winos, Club Vlad was famous for the quality of its cellar. A wispy, fair-haired youth, bled to a pleasing marble white, smiled blarily at Mavreeds, and languidly lifted his chin in ritual surrender. Mavreeds shook his head in polite refusal and continued until he came to a short, darkish girl with sunken eyes. He ran his hand along the curve of her shoulder. The waitress jerked at his touch like a startled animal. Despite her wasted appearance, her eyes were hot and wet. The drug forced into her veins made her pupils shimmer in the dim light like candle flames. Mavreeds motioned to the bartender, who provided him with a large hypodermic needle and a wine glass. He stuck the syringe into the shunt implanted in the waitress's elbow, withdrawing a half pint of tainted blood. He squirted the coppery liquid into a wine glass and quickly downed it before it had a chance to cool and coagulate. Mavreeds, over here. He looked up, his head already swimming from the drugs leached from the human. It was Wellman, waving at him from one of the booths near the dance floor. He could see Wellman had his ubiquitous portable mini-cam clutched in one hand. Mavreeds returned his old friend's greeting and tossed a couple of crumpled bills onto the bar. Crap, man. We thought you weren't going to make it. Mavreeds shrugged. I overslept. Is Smith here? Wellman grinned, exposing his... This is a cue to drink some water. I swear to God, I know how to read. All right. Wellman grinned, exposing his fangs. Yeah, he's checking out the talent. Mavreeds grunted as he slid into the booth alongside Wellman. He'd known both of them for decades. In fact, Wellman had been one of his first converts, while Smith had been responsible for Mavreeds' own conversion in an alley behind some godforsaken rock venue back in '69. At first, Mavreeds had thought the quiet, speckled young man was just another dealer, but Smith had had far more than grass, black mollies, and window pane to offer. Far more. Smith shouldered his way across the crowded dance floor, the flickering neon reflected in his glasses. At first glance, he appeared to be a mere human, dressed in ragged blue jeans and a rumpled t-shirt. This camouflage had served him well for over 3 decades. It was impossible to tell by looking at him that he was one of the more important and influential leaders behind the uprising. Mavreeds was uncertain of Smith's exact age, or even if Smith was his real name. He had occasionally overheard his mentor talking about Rasputin and Catherine the Great in extremely personal detail, and every so often the southwestern twang he affected lapsed into a vaguely Slavic accent. How's it look tonight? Asked Wellman, sipping a snifter of A+ methadone addict. Promising. The first fight's between Delphi's George and Keckhaver's Mueller. Looks like a good show. I'd put my money on Mueller. Smith's eyes glowed wine red behind the lens of his spectacles. Despite their thickness, the glasses were purely decorative. Like most vampires, Smith's vision was excellent, but he'd grown accustomed to wearing them as part of his protective coloration. As he spoke, he gestured to one of the waitresses tethered to the bar. The human obediently shambled forward, the spool whirling as the chain played out. I just want to interrupt real quick and be like, man, this sounds like a Saw movie or something. Like something they would make. Blumhouse should make a movie out of this. Oh, it's so gross and weird. Okay, Mavreeds scanned the dance floor while Smith pulled himself a drink. He recognized only a few of the vampires gyrating on the hypnotic electronic pulse pouring from the speakers. Most of Club Vlad's patrons were nouveau undead, converted since the uprising. They were easy to spot, since most were tricked out in drag. The club was packed with vampires and vampiresses, dressed like Bela Lugosi or Vampira. Back in the bad old days, dressing that blatantly was tantamount to hanging a sign around your neck that said, "Drive a stake through my heart." Some of the wealthier attendees were accompanied by their own private stock, humans clad entirely in black rubber and leather except for their exposed jugulars. The kept humans' eyes glinted wetly from inside their zippered masks, reminding Malrides of the cats in his kitchen. The gong sounded, and the dancers halted their movements, turning as one to face the stage. Club Vlad's official master of ceremonies, a stocky vampire dressed in a black cassock and a floppy beret, raised his hands for silence. He held a cordless microphone, and his voice boomed out over the club speakers. Welcome and good evening. 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 Sorry. Why is the stress on the second E instead of the first? Good evening versus good evening. Fellow children of the night, to Club Vlad, the city's premier undead night spot. We've got a fine floor show lined up for you, if I do say so myself. Something for everybody. We've got heavyweights, welterweights, bantams, and even ladies and children's competition to look forward to before a cock crow. I don't want to hold up the festivities by yakking any longer than I need to, so let's bring out our first pair of contestants. Countess Delphi and Dr. Keckhaver emerged from the wings, leading their humans on chains. Delphi was a tall, statuesque vampiress with flaming red hair sculpted into a long, flowing mohawk that hung halfway down her back, while Keckhaver wore a mauve velvet tuxedo and a handsomely waxed, forked goatee. The audience whistled and hooted appreciatively. Countess Delphi's George was a strapping Negro with heavy scar tissue on his cheeks and nose. Talks about piercings that I'm not gonna read. He's got some piercings in places that are not appropriate for YouTube. But as impressive as George looked, Keckhaver's Mueller was the true center of attention. The human's mouth was twisted into a permanent sneer by a scar that ran from his left cheek to where his ear had once been. His head was clean-shaven, as were his eyebrows. On closer inspection, there wasn't a single hair to be seen on the massively built German's pale body. I don't know why it had to talk about his genitals. But there you are. There's a sentence about genitals. Anyway, both fighters were outfitted in leather fighting harnesses and special razor-studded gloves. Ladies and gentlemen, on my left is Countess Delphi's George, 6'3", 220 pounds, blood type O positive, 2 fights, no losses, obviously. The crowd tittered at the joke. And on my right is none other than Dr. Keckhaver's Mueller, 6'4¼ 233 pounds, type AB negative, 3 wins. Mueller lifted his razored fists over his head, his sneer tightening even further. The audience clapped and cheered. George glowered at the big German but said nothing. The master of ceremonies gestured to someone off stage, and the sound of a diesel engine added to the already considerable noise. A large metal cage was lowered from the rafters. The bars looked rusty, but they weren't. The Countess and Keckhaver removed their tethers and stepped back, surrendering the field to their champions. The master of ceremonies opened the cage door, and the fighters entered. The diesel motor changed gear and began to lift the cage high into the air, swinging it out over the packed dance floor. Mavrides and Smith remained seated while Wellman clambered on top of the table in order to get a better viewpoint. Only the Novu undead danced directly under the cages. The humans suspended above the mass of eager, hungry vampires stared coldly at one another as they gripped the gore-flecked bars for balance. The master of ceremonies smiled, exposing his pearl-white fangs. Let the dance begin. The taped electronic music kicked back in, louder than before. Mueller and George surged from their respective corners, razored fists slicing naked flesh. The odor of adrenaline-heavy blood filled the air. Club Vlad's patrons lifted their voices in an ululating howl of raw pleasure. George landed a punch on Mueller's jaw, neatly slicing off most of his lower lip. The German staggered backward, his sneer transformed into a crimson grin. Before George could savor his coup, the bigger man grabbed the filigreed chain that connected his opponent's piercings and yanked. George shrieked as the rings tore from the places I didn't want to mention. He instinctively grabbed his wounded areas, groin, allowing Mueller the chance to smash a razor-studded fist into his unprotected face, nearly severing George's nose. George's eyes bugged as he strove to keep from strangling on the wash of blood filling his sinuses. The spectators below laughed and jeered as they jostled one another for a position beneath the cage, their heads thrown back and mouths open wide. George was losing, and he knew it. He grabbed at Mueller's hairless crotch. The German tried to sidestep him, but there wasn't enough room to maneuver. The big man bellowed like a bull in a gelding stall. That's what he did, because he was gelded. There was a minor scuffle as some of the vampires fought to retrieve the tidbit. Maddened by pain, Mueller pounded George's face unmercifully, slicing open his eyes and gouging huge ruts along his forehead and scarred cheekbones. Blood fell from the dangling cage in a crimson shower, splashing the wildly dancing vampires. Blinded and mortally wounded, George offered Mueller his throat. The killing blow was swift and, compared to what had gone before, relatively painless. George dropped to the wire mesh floor of his cage, his life pumping from his severed jugular onto the dancers below. "See? What did I tell you?" Smith grinned. "Kekkaver's stable is the best of the city, if not the entire northwest sector. I trust you got all that on tape, Wellman." "Every second," he grinned, patting the handheld minicam. Wellman was justifiably proud of his private library of atrocity footage. Even Malreeds had to admit to being impressed by his companion's technique. Why do I keep forgetting how to say this stupid man's name? Whatever. Malreeds. "Well, it doesn't look like he'll be breeding any champions from this one," remarked Malreeds. The cage was being lowered to the stage where Dr. Kekkaver stood waiting to claim his champion, his stable's veterinarian beside him. Now that the killing lust had fled, Mueller was feeling the effects of emasculation. He collapsed across George's body, his eyes glazing as he gripped his opponent's cooling flesh. The shivers caused by the oncoming shock made it look as if he were grieving for his fallen comrade. The vet hurried into the cage and squatted next to the fallen giant. He glanced at Kekkaver and shook his head. Either way, this would be Mueller's last fight. The master of ceremonies stepped forward, waving the chattering crowd into silence. "Well, ladies and gentlemen, what shall it be for our brave contestant? Is it a yes? Is it a yay or nay?" There was quiet for a second. Then the audience answered as one. Their voices joined in a primitive sing-song. "One of us, one of us, one of us." The master of ceremonies nodded his approval and turned to look at Dr. Kekkaver. The tall, moon-faced vampire stood and thoughtfully stroked his goatee. "So, Dr. Kekkaver, what will it be?" Kekkaver stared at his dying champion for a few more seconds, then nodded. A ragged cheer burst from the spectators. The veterinarian pocketed his stethoscope and returned the premixed lethal injection to his little black bag. "Do it," ordered Kekkaver. The veterinarian sank his fangs into Mueller's neck, rewarding him with the prize every champion that enters the stage strives for: immortality. Mavreeds looked away, already bored. Wellman climbed back down from his vantage point atop the table. "I think I got it," he muttered aloud. "But we're too far from the stage to tell for sure." "So, what do you think of the show?" asked Smith, grinning. Reeds glanced back at the stage. Mueller's body was being carefully removed from the cage and placed in a portable coffin. In 3 days' time, the fighter would rise from the dead and take his place amongst vampire society. George's mutilated carcass, on the other hand, was being dragged away by its heels. The Negro's corpse would be used as food to boost the protein levels of the club's captive human population. Reeds shrugged. I imagine he's not going to appreciate coming back minus his dick. Smith guffawed as if this were the wittiest thing he'd heard that night. Ain't that the truth? A glimpse of red mane and black satin caught Reed's attention. It was Countess Delphi, looking a bit miffed, shouldering her way to the bar. Excuse me a moment, would you, Smith? The Countess stood next to a trembling, watery-eyed junkie. The human's milk, white flesh, crawled with goose flesh. Reeds wondered if it was the effect of the drug or the intensity of the Countess's expression that made the human shake. I'm sorry about your fighter. Delphi glanced at him as she drew a double shot from the junkie's shunt. It happens. Reeds shifted his weight, suddenly feeling rather awkward. Yeah, well. Could I buy you a drink? She looked at him again, this time a little longer. You're not Novu, are you? It wasn't a question. You're one of the Smith prodigies, am I right? Yeah, I was converted in 69. She smiled, exposing the curve of her fangs against her full lower lip. 1969? Then you're still young. Not as immature as those yahoos. She waved disparagingly to the Novu dressed in their opera capes and Elvira wigs. But that's okay, her smile widened. I like them young. Reeds didn't bother to tell Smith or Wellman where he was going. They were used to his sudden disappearances. Wellman envied Reeds' luck with the females, while Smith had evolved beyond sexuality. Blood and power games were the only things that held the elder vampire's interest. You have a car? Delphi asked as they prepared to leave. I don't drive cars. We'll take mine then. Her car was in the parking lot. A human dressed in a dove-gray chauffeur's livery opened the door of the vintage Duesenberg as they approached. I meant what I said about your fighter. He should have won. Delphi shrugged. The world is full of humans. A naked human girl child pressed herself against the opposite door as they climbed into the back seat. Delphi caressed the girl's pale cheek. Come, come, Sherry. You shouldn't be afraid of my friends. They ended up at his place. The Countess ordered her chauffeur to wait until she returned. The human nodded and said nothing as they took Sherry with them to Reeds' apartment. The girl whimpered when Delphi ordered her to leave the car, but that was all. Reeds admired the power the Countess wielded over her thralls. The vampires, at least physically, are impotent and sterile. They have no need for primitive means of replicating themselves. But the undead were once living beings. The drive to procreate is strong and is the last of the biological instincts to fade from their personalities. Reeds could not imagine a time when sex would be meaningless to him, but there had also been a time when he could not imagine never seeing the sun or his own reflection again. He escorted the Countess and Sherry into the room he kept for such visits, with the black tapers burning in a candelabra at the head and foot of the specially designed double-width coffin. Delphi seemed suitably impressed. He climbed inside, fully dressed, and motioned for her to follow. Delphi laughed quietly and herded the frightened waif ahead of her. There's nothing to be afraid of, Sherry, Delphi whispered soothingly. All we want is love you. Isn't that right, my dear? Reeds smiled to encourage the child, opening his arms wide to embrace her. Yes, we want to share our love with you. And the rest is gross, and I don't like it. Basically, vampires, I guess at their age, their sex is to just feed from, like, a human at the same time. They get off on the human slowly dying in their arms. It's not consensual for the human. That's all I'm gonna say. He woke up to find himself alone in the coffin. That wasn't exactly true. Delphi hadn't bothered to take Sherry's corpse with her when she'd left. Stiffed again, he groaned as he crawled over the body, cursing Delphi under his breath. At least you'd think she'd have the decency to dispose of her own empty, instead of leaving it for him to deal with. As he glanced down at the girl's body, he noticed the barely perceptible rise and fall of her rib cage. Mavrides checked her pulse and lifted her left eyelid. She wasn't quite dead, but she was darn close. He contemplated finishing her off, then decided against it. He could get a better meal from one of the kittens. He pulled her out of the coffin, draping her limp form over his shoulder like a fur stole. If he broke her limbs the right way, she'd just fit in the incinerator chute. He hoped he wouldn't have to dig out the butcher knife and do it the messy, old-fashioned way. After all, he didn't have all night. End of that story. Which was a doozy to end it on. My God. Oh. Bravo, Nancy O. Collins. That was absolutely sickening to read. I hated it. I did say it'd be kind of like a horror movie, but there isn't really enough of a plot for it to be a movie, unless it's one of those, like, slice of life kind of, look how weird my day is, my day in, an entire day in my life where a whole bunch of weird shit happens, kind of quirky movie, but the main character is a vampire, and he's just going, woe is me, now I have to get rid of this body I didn't ask for, like Kanye West with his meme with the fucking plastic bottle on the plane that I think about way more than I ever should. I don't know, I liked it. It was disgusting and unsettling, and I did not enjoy it, and I liked that. I like that. I hope you guys liked it. We have time, probably have time for one more. I don't know. Let me check how many pages it is. Oh, it's kind of short. It's page 49. It's 10 pages. Yeah, this will be fine. We can finish with Stoker's Mistress. By Clint Collins. Okay. Should I get water before I start or just suffer? I'm going to get water before I start instead of suffering. You guys can be quiet. You can sit in silence for like 30 seconds. I will be right back. Okay, cool. And you can definitely hear me. I can see it going up and down. Okay. Last story. Oh, dang it. I didn't put a freaking thing in it. Okay. Stoker's Mistress by Clint Collins. From When Darkness Fell, the memoirs of Guillermo de la Torre, a regent of the Latin Empire. 3 October. 1 Anno Obscurus. Don't know what that means. As it was my first visit to the Black House, and knowing my duties would prevent me from returning anytime soon, I slipped away from the reception to see what changes our king had made to the historic mansion in the last few months. In one hallway, they had begun hanging portraits of the champions of night. There was Vlad I, posed in his throne room with his wolfhounds. Salah al-Nasab, also known as the Red Sheik, whom the Crusaders came to fear even more than Saladin, I don't know. And among others, our current king, whose teeth they said once knew the perfumed neck of Nefertiti. The human, oh no, this is interrupting myself. This is a story with a lot of words, like, that I'm not sure I know how to say. A lot of names, I should say that. I'm a very American. I'm not good with accents or anything. Anyway, the human workman ushered from the building before sunset, had yet to remove some paintings of former tenants who seemed somewhat ill at ease in the company of the illustrious undead, like nervous prey. Pausing before one ornate frame, I wondered what this grim-mouthed president would have said when the masses of the Dark Revolution toppled the monument bearing his name. Anything resembling a giant stake had no place in the capital of the Kingdom of Night. When that great stone tooth fell, it was immediately chipped into souvenirs now held more precious than blood. Having been a patron of both Goya and Velázquez, I appreciated fine art. While studying an excellent oil of Thomas Jefferson, who once unknowingly entertained a vampire at Monticello, I heard footsteps in the hall. I turned, then bowed, putting my hand to my throat in the ancient tradition, Your Majesty. Ambassador, you've missed the tasting. The speaker's blood was appropriately robust, and, as expected, the vice president's was light and amusing, but I saved something special for you. He handed me a goblet, a first lady's blood. I sniffed, then sipped. Californian. Ah, but which one? I cocked my head, licking my lips, trying to sift through the varied strains. Americans, being an ethnic stew of blood types, were the hardest to discern, yet no gentleman's cellar was complete without a collection of their best blends. Shall I give you a hint? Said the king. It's not his wife. He indicated a rather glum man whose portrait leaned against the wall with others awaiting removal. We contacted him not long after his own people forced him from power, sensing his need for revenge. Couldn't have it done without him. He knew all the vulnerabilities. What does he want? To be consul over the states he lost in 1960? We shall see. But actually, I can't think of a better man. The king slapped a hand on my shoulder. But, ambassador, Ambassador, let's get you out of this musty hall. I want to show you what the queen has done. The moonlight was full upon the thorn garden, and the October air was refreshingly crisp. The blood maidens, the queen's attendants, had long ago snipped off the frivolous roses and encouraged the proud fangs of those bushes to grow long and sharp. Sweet, night-blooming Transylvanian flowers, in love with the chill wind, had just been planted, and the king lustily inhaled their deep, narcotic scents. Now begins the reign of night, he said, toasting the glittering sky. This is one anno obscurus, the first year of darkness. Day has had its gaudy hour. Now it's time for darker dress, don't you think? I agreed with His Majesty, and, clinking goblets, we smiled and drank to the roll of midnight. Eyes to the sky as I sipped, I wondered what the humans must think whenever they look up at the night, which only a few months ago held no terrors for them. Now all the stars must seem sharp teeth and an endless, hungry mouth. The king chuckled and gestured beyond the garden. How the Americans stared from the gates when I painted this place a gleaming obsidian and raised our crimson and black flag above it. Their late president had it a little wrong. The 1,000 points of light they will see now, my friend, is the moonlight gleaming off our fangs. A woman's laughter came from an open window, and the sounds of easy revelry from inside reminded me why I was here. I felt a flush of embarrassment, as barely an hour ago the king had presented me with my credentials as ambassador to Costa Rica, and I had yet to fully express my heartfelt appreciation. The honor was unexpected, as I did not belong to any of the prominent Central American families, but to a rather recent Madrid line. Naturally, my Spanish was good enough for the position, but he could have chosen so many others with powerful connections and famous names. Your Majesty, I began, please allow me to thank you for... The king raised his hand. I empowered a great many envoys tonight, but your appointment gave me the greatest pleasure, my friend. Quite frankly, some were chosen to satisfy political debts, others to keep peace among the families. Many were bad mistakes. He smiled a little at this, and it will be understood when I remove them. But in your case, not only do you have the qualifications, but I've always wanted to show my gratitude for Bogota. You do remember. has to drink some water. Oh. It would be hard to forget meeting the king and his thirsty entourage in Bogota, even if it was from 1851. Unlike the Transylvanians, who enjoyed the longer nights of winter, I preferred to spend the season where the wind didn't howl, but became a lover's secret in the palm trees. Biding my time until a family gathering in the Yucatan, I was doing a rather lazy tour of the Americas when I paused for a few days near Bogota at the grand hacienda of a portly, gregarious vampire affectionately known as Tio Jose, who was always eager to hear any news of his kin and to provide you with a pretty village girl. Early one sunset, my host excitedly roused me and asked me to help him find before dawn the most beautiful woman in Colombia. But before telling me why he flew south, I flew north. After a few inquiries, I chose Maria Gonzalez of Cartagena. Some money into the wrong hands, and soon the Latin lovely, in nightclothes and blindfold, was taking a midnight coach ride up into the Andes into Bogota. It was the king's first visit to South America since his coronation in 1728, and in his desire to be hospitable and quench the boundless thirst of his guests, our host emptied 2 villagers within a week. On what was to be the king's last night, we presented him with Maria. In her sacrificial gown of red satin, this proud general's daughter, with the flashing eyes, stood her ground and did not turn away as the royal fangs neared the pulse in her throat. Instead, she tossed her dark hair over her shoulder, baring her neck, and smiled. Impressed and amused, the king broke with tradition and said he would be feeding privately, leaving us to understand he would not be sharing this beauty. His eyes never left hers as he carried Maria to his rooms, her slim brown arms going smoothly about his neck, red lips against his chest. Hoping to ease the embarrassment of the moment, Tio Jose invited everyone for a midnight raid upon a remote mountain village. "Your Majesty," he said, with innocent sincerity to the queen, "I can promise you a virgin every inch as beautiful as Maria." The dark empress fixed him with a cold stare and turned on her heel, the attendants following meekly. To no one's surprise, the king extended his visit, and soon our beleaguered host was supplying victims for both the king and Maria. They rarely left their suite, and when they did take a stroll in the courtyard, whispering along with the fountains, it was arm in arm. The queen was in seclusion, and no one dared approach her. She had a blood maiden whipped for suggesting they return to Transylvania, and another defanged for bowing to Maria. Even though she belonged to one of the oldest families, it seemed the queen's fall from royalty was imminent. For the rest of us, it was like being in the eye of a deadly hurricane, knowing the eerie calm would not last. This was now a house divided, and with the queen close to losing power, there was talk of civil war, unknown since the 1300s, when marriages of convenience finally wedded the warring families. Once jovial, Tio Jose grew more silent each night. Already late for the family gathering, I had to depart, but did so with heavy heart, fearing for both my friend and the peace we had enjoyed for centuries. I left with every intention to return as soon as possible, whether Okay, drinking some water. Okay. I forget where I forget where I went. Okay. Already late for the family gathering, I had to depart, but did so with heavy heart, fearing for both my friends and the peace we had enjoyed for centuries. I left with every intention to return as soon as possible, whether contrived or not. Ignore that noise. The king was called away to settle a feud in Argentina. He came back to find Maria waiting for him in the moon-silvered courtyard, still smoking from a full day in the sun. The king's affair no longer a threat. Peace was maintained, but the queen did not receive me at the dark court for almost 30 years. Invitations from her family ceased, and Tio Jose, who only meant to please, disappeared. Yes, I do remember, Your Majesty. She was very beautiful. Then we were quiet for a time, sipping from our goblets. When he later spoke, the softness was gone from his eyes, and those Colombian nights were again many years gone. You received those cabins on guerrilla activity in the jungles? Yes, Your Majesty. I was planning to leave at sunset tomorrow to join my staff already in San Jose. Excellent. Whom have you appointed to your embassy? I quickly listed a few people, all from a mix of families, and the king nodded. Good choices. I regret you won't be here for the Halloween victory celebrations, but the situation does demand immediate attention. We can't allow them to ignite rebellion in the Latin Empire. My thoughts exactly. I plan to snuff these little flames through the von Sorheim ruse. Von Sorheim ruse. The king concurred. For the practice of sending recently converted young women familiar with the terrain into suspected rebel areas was highly effective against scattered opposition. Claiming to have escaped from the undead, the woman would be rescued. Suddenly like a siren, like a emergency siren, distracted me. Oh God. Claiming to have escaped from the undead, the woman would be rescued and escorted to the rebel base camp, all the while soundlessly followed by a full strike force gliding on the wind. Surprise and victory were almost always complete. We were discussing alternate strategies when the blonde first concubine of the defense minister stumbled out the door laughing, arms loosely around the dashing new ambassador to Italy. Startled at the sight of us, they immediately took to wing and dissolved into the night. Well, said the king, a smile on his face, I don't want to keep you from the merriment, and the Countess of Zorzik has been asking for you. But since you're leaving soon, I want to show you something before I release you into the frivolity. We returned inside, handing our goblets to a servant, and took an elevator down the long, secret throat of the Black House. The Black House. The Black House instead of the White House. This was all done during the 1950s, when the Americans feared nuclear war, explained the king, as we fell swiftly past the floors. Perhaps the most extensive fallout shelter ever made, designed to keep the executive branch functioning even despite a direct hit. We came to a soundless stop, and the doors opened onto a carpeted hallway, peopled again with portraits of displeased former residents. Some changes have still to be made, but this is a fitting headquarters, don't you think? There were hundreds of rooms, and sunlight is thousands of feet away, perfect for the daylight retreat of the dark court, and one special guest. I followed the king into one of the rooms, bare except for a table on which there was a carafe of dark liquid and some glasses. The table stood next to a black curtained window. I don't want to spoil your appetite for dinner later tonight, but this is an excellent congressman from Kentucky. The king poured me a small glass, and I savored the honeyed taste of bourbon in his blood. I'm sorry you'll miss our Halloween celebration. All the families will be represented. Many of the humans' leaders will be given to our masses, and we will rejoice in our greatest triumph and avenge our greatest shame. The king moved to the window. Not so long ago, one man had the opportunity to totally expose our world and destroy our race. It was the closest to extinction we had ever come. All along it's been thought he acted alone when, in fact, we were betrayed by one of our own. The unthinkable had actually happened. Come close, my friend, for a good look. I give you now Bram Stoker's vampire whore. The king pulled the curtain aside, and I could see a beautiful young woman idly combing her long red hair, which shone with such brilliance I felt it was the closest I'd gotten to anything like the first blush of sunrise since my mortal days. I believe their President Kennedy had this one-way mirror installed, said the king. It's been perfect for keeping an eye on our little traitor. Oh no. Oh, I think... The cover of the book just started ripping. Oh no. Oh dear. This is... Alright. Anyway. I shook my head. Amazing. I'd always heard rumors about the book, but that one of us would. A soft, odd smile was on her lips, as though she'd heard this all before. A classic story of poor security. Her actions brought about the apprenticeship laws of 1899. The king poured us both another taste of the Kentuckian. She was a recent recruit, just 18 and a spoiled nobleman's daughter when she got her teeth. Charming and beautiful, she was allowed by the local master to go on some early kills unsupervised. That night, in 1895, when she encountered Stoker on a Dublin street, the mortal instincts she had yet to outgrow betrayed her, and she fell in love with the human. The king pointed to a picture of the handsome, bearded Stoker by her bed. He was just the right person for her. She was disgusted with her new life as a vampire and needed someone who could tell her story. Stoker had written theater reviews, and like any good newspaperman, knew a story when he saw one. With her help, he was writing a book that would finally reveal the truth about us. Only when her master made an unannounced visit to her lair, customary during the 10-year probationary period then, was her betrayal exposed. The beauty now came before the mirror and ran pale, slender fingers, the color of the bones of the moon, up slowly through her hair. The eyes staring at mine were a cool sea green and bottomless. She could have easily been a first concubine, even a princess of the dark court, whispered the king against the glass, reading my mind. A tragedy, I said, already loving the way she turned her head as she combed out her hair, glowing like hot copper against the black silk of her nightgown. But tell me, Your Majesty, why wasn't Stoker immediately put to death? Our investigation revealed he had already sent an outline to his publisher detailing some of our habits. We feared his death would arouse unwelcome suspicion and decided to make the best of it by letting him live to write about fictional rather than factual vampires. Better to be ridiculed as folklore than pursued by panicked humans. So we allowed Stoker, under our editorial guidance, to write the ludicrous Dracula, making sure the humans triumphed, and encouraged him to write other fiction to cement his reputation as a fantasist. Why am I struggling with that word? In exchange for his silence about us, he was permitted to live with his imprisoned harlot, and did so until his death in 1912, at which time she became my personal guest. I have also decreed that her name never be spoken or known. Untying the sash, the nameless beauty let the black silk robe slide from Pearl's shoulders, her smooth body revealed like a knife from its sheath. No wonder he kept his word. She is exquisite. The king nodded. I always fall in love with her and leave hating her all the more. But this is the last time I'll see her until the celebrations. Halloween night at the Victory Pavilion on the Mall, I will tell our people all you've just heard. Acknowledging the cries for revenge, I'll take a stake fashioned from the oldest tree in Transylvania and hammer it into that regrettably perfect left breast and through her traitor's heart. How the masses will roar, and her anguished shriveling to dry bone will be broadcast live to all our kingdom. With this, and my defeat of the humans who would dare oppose me in 2028. I assured His Majesty that when the families met then to choose a king, there could be little doubt he would win the crown for another 300 years. Her death, like Marie Antoinette's, made good politics. She was now wearing a high-necked dress of white Irish linen, and after pinning up her hair with a golden clasp, she sat demurely on her bed with folded hands, like a turn-of-the-century maid awaiting her gentleman caller. She always dresses for dinner, said the king, in keeping with the old ways. She is now more of a vampire than she ever was. The door to her room was suddenly... Siren again. Shush. The door to her room was suddenly opened, and a ragged, filthy man was shoved inside. The frightened wretch fell to his knees before her and did not look up. Kneeling before the man who only a few months ago had been sleeping on a grate in his nation's capital, the Irish beauty stroked his unshaven cheek and put her lips to his ear. I could not hear what she said, but soon saw tears streaking the grime on his face. She has just promised him paradise, said the king, in a world where he will live forever and fly free above the streets where he once lived in shame. They never resist her. She put a hand across his eyes, another custom of the aristocracy, and gently kissed the throbbing jugular pulse she would soon still. Head tilted, she opened her mouth to show delicate, viperish fangs, bright ivory against the deep rose of her lips. The man shuddered once when she sank her teeth to the gums in his scrawny neck, then slumped against her, surrendering to the dream of a new life. But the dark wings were not won so easily. Like most of the cattle, he would be staked, beheaded, and burned. With our triumph, there was no need to expand our numbers, and it now took the king's signature to approve a new vampire. As we watched her feed, there came a knock at the door. Yes? Your Majesty, the Queen has requested your presence at dinner. Thank you, Franz. We will be up shortly. The king checked his watch. Yes. We have been holding everything up, but I want to show you my surprise. Our own Eva Braun, to the man who would have wrought a holocaust upon us. Stoker warned them in his own way, but they thought it was all a joke, didn't they? Now was not the last laugh truly on them, Ambassador. It took one last look at the flame-haired vampire, lost in the ecstasy of her hunger, eyes closed and lips pulsing. Then the king drew the curtain. I hope you approve tonight's menu. I selected it myself. A year ago at Cannes, I met 2 French actresses. I didn't attend to them as I was planning our European strategy, but I never forgot them. They've just been flown in from Paris and will be the main course in the Red Room. As you know, I'm a connoisseur of the Gallic strains. As we rode up in the elevator, I listened as the king expounded on the subtle distinctions of flavor among the regions of France. I nodded politely, but found my thoughts turning to my own special tastes, to the tropical nights ahead in Costa Rica, and the young senoritas, blood-rich with the taste of the forbidden sun. As I stepped out of the elevator, my teeth had already begun to sharpen and descend. Who would tell the humans the eternal night was still so very, very young, and that there would be no resurrecting dawn? Who would tell them their prayers were only the noise of flies in a web? I felt no pity, even as I sampled the violet-eyed Parisinian, only my vast, wonderful hunger. Stoker's Mistress had given the humans the only chance they ever had. There would not be another. End of story. Personally, I'm not as into that one as I am into the others. I do like the idea of, like, there's this whole government. We'll never have power again, etc., etc. It's interesting, but I'm not really into whole, like, snooty politicians sniffing wines from goblets and talking about taking over Costa Rica. Not really into, like, the politics of it. I like more of the horror of it all. But it wasn't, like, a bad story. It wasn't, like, poorly written or anything. But I do like maybe Nancy A. Collins and schlock a little bit more than politics. Politics are confusing and kind of boring. Sorry for complaining. I hope you liked it, at least. Okay, well, let me switch. It's not my intro, it is my outro now. Thank you for being here, especially if you made it all the way to the end. That is very awesome and amazing and cool and rad and chill. I don't expect anyone to make it to the end, so if anybody does, it's awesome. I'm going to be doing, let me see, 17 stories. We do maybe 2, maybe 3. We're just going to be here for another, maybe 2 months of reading this on Sundays at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for roughly 2 hours, depending on what we're reading and all that. So I will see you next week, and if you're interested at all in studying Gothic literature, I will also be here in the middle of the week to do that, and there's all kinds of stories to listen to instead of this one if it is too explicit for you. Again, thank you. I appreciate it. I'm going to go now, and I will see you around. Goodbye.